All right, so neoliberal ghoul Pete Buttigieg recently went on Face the Nation to discuss what he and the Biden administration are currently doing to address the shortage of baby formula that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks here in the United States. And even though this was unambiguously a glaring insight into the problems of the incentive structure of a capitalist system failing to deliver a basic life necessity, in this case baby formula, he instead uses this as an opportunity not to critique the capitalist system, but to reinforce it and to double down on the same exact problems that got us here in the first place. So let's go ahead and hear from Pete Buttigieg.
On a personal note, we've been talking about this baby formula shortage nationwide that's been ongoing now for months. You have infants at home. Do you have problems getting hold of formula?
Yeah, this is very personal for us. We got 2 9-month-old children. Baby formula is a very big part of our lives. And like millions of Americans, we've been rooting around stores, checking online, getting in touch with relatives in other places where they don't have the same shortages to see what they can send over. And we figured it out. We're all set, at least for now. But I think about what that would be like if you're a shift worker with 2 jobs. Maybe you don't have a car. You literally don't have the time or the money to be going from store to store. That's why this is such a serious issue, and that's why it's getting attention at the highest levels, including, of course, direct involvement by the president.
Well, and this is going to be an issue Congress takes up this week. I know the president said more action's coming, but this has been ongoing for months. There were supply chain issues already. Then you have the issue with this one plant, Abbott, whistleblower in September, February, the recall. It's May. Why has it taken so long? And why did the president on Friday seem to say that it was new information to him? He said, if we'd been better mind readers, I guess we could have done something earlier.
Well, look, the administration acted from day one after the recall, taking steps like creating more flexibility for the WIC program to help rebalance the availability of formula in the states. There are more actions that are underway, including looking at imports. But fundamentally, we are here because a company was not able to guarantee that its plant was safe, and that plant has shut down.
But that is the federal government's job as regulators to help ensure
as
safety
regulators,
of the
yes,
plant.
but let's be very clear. This is a capitalist country. The government does not make baby formula, nor should it. Companies make formula. And one of those companies, a company which, by the way, seems to have 40% market share, messed up and is unable to confirm that a plant, a major plant, is safe and free of contamination. So the most important thing to do right now, of course, is to get that plant in Michigan up and running safely. And that's the work that's going on between the company and the FDA. It's got to be safe, and it's got to be up and running as soon as possible. But this is the difference between a supply chain problem, in other words, a problem about moving goods around, and a supply problem, which has to do with whether they're being produced in the first place.
Okay, so there was a lot wrong with that. Obviously, there was kind of a two-pronged critique of capitalism that he could have used this as a chance to explain to the American people. Number one is, he's talking about there at the beginning how he and his husband have been able to, go around to different stores and rely on family members, etc., to maintain their supply of formula for their kids and whatnot. But, he also did point out that your average American, your average working class American who has a full-time job or maybe a couple of jobs, maybe they rely on public transportation, they're not necessarily going to be in the position that they can go around and do that same thing and go to all these different stores and try to find reliable access to baby formula. So it's a two-pronged critique of capitalism. Number one, in the sense that we don't have any guaranteed paid maternal or paid maternity leave or paternity leave in this country. So clearly, corporations have a stranglehold on our government to the point where we are not allowed to pass an overwhelmingly popular policy like paid maternity and paternity leave in this country that would give people more flexibility. On top of that, obviously people are not being paid living wages, so it's that much more difficult if you have a rise in the potential costs of baby formula to get it, etc., etc. You could go on and on critiquing the different, various aspects of what he was saying there at the beginning, but then he gets to the second pronged critique of capitalism, or what should have been a critique of capitalism, in a situation that he's describing there with a corporation failing to maintain their supply, or to maintain even basic safety standards within their facilities. So this isn't a problem where it was a handful of managers or CEO or a board of directors that they were just being lazy in that moment and they were just overlooking the problem. No, that wasn't a problem with some lazy CEO or some bad individual actor. It was a problem with the incentive structure that is inherently baked within a capitalist enterprise. In this case, you had a corporation like Abbott, which, as he was pointing out there, has a 40% market share. They've created essentially an oligopoly with 2 or 3 other corporations to control this entire industry. And you had this one corporation in Abbott that spent years and years and years neglecting the safety standards within their production facilities, this one specifically in that Michigan plant. And they spent years and years and years while they were overlooking making those investments in their own product and making sure that it was safe for average consumers. They were overlooking that while simultaneously spending billions and billions of dollars in stock buybacks in order to inflate their shareholder value and deliver higher dividends for their shareholders and better payouts to their executives and CEOs, etc. But again, that's not a problem with a handful of bad actors. That is how the capitalist system operates within any industry that you want to talk about. Their one job, the CEOs, the executives, the board of directors, their one job is to deliver maximum shareholder value. They have a fiduciary responsibility to do that. And so the problems with the capitalist incentive structure here are that they have a direct financial incentive to not make those capital investments to increase the domestic supply of baby formula. They don't have the incentive to spend the money to maintain the safety standards within their facilities. So all of this comes down to a perfect example of the flaw of having a capitalist mode of production, or the flaw of having the profit motive determine industries that are basic life necessities, whether that's healthcare, whether that's housing, whether that's baby formula, or any number of other things. So again, he could have used this as an opportunity to critique that system, but he basically used it as an opportunity to completely reinforce that. And even at the end there is saying, on the horizon, the solution here is to get that plant up and running as quickly and as safely and efficiently as possible, which is true. You want to see that happen, but that's just reinforcing the same exact problem and only going to serve to further entrench the power of corporations like Abbott to continue doing the same goddamn thing that they've been doing. I mean, do you think that this is really this encouraging them to maintain their safety standards with no actual massive expansion of the FDA's capabilities? Do you really think that this is going to change that underlying structure of the problems of what led to this situation in the first place? No, of course it's not. But, there you have a neoliberal ghoul giving his response to the problems that were very obviously at a fundamental level created by the capitalist system in a very inherent way. But he didn't use it as an opportunity to critique that. He obviously used it as an opportunity to commend capitalism in this situation and saying, well, we're a capitalist country and the government should not be involved in any aspect of producing baby formula. Well, I got a great breakdown here from Jacobin, who was getting into some of the details as to how completely ridiculous this interview was for Pete Buttigieg, but I just wanted to read to you guys a couple of paragraphs from this to put in perspective exactly how much of a failure the Biden administration was on this issue, and also how they're a failure in just their lack of imagination in terms of what a government can do to maintain stability for basic life necessities for the American people. So here from Jacobin, they say, at heart, this is just a lazy bit of political ass covering. Yep. In reality, the Biden administration has a great deal of responsibility for what happened. Federal regulators took months to respond to the October whistleblower complaint, counter to what Buttigieg was saying there, that they acted on the first day. No, they took months to respond to the initial whistleblower complaint about food safety issues at the Abbott Laboratories plant in question, only for 2 babies to die and another to be hospitalized a couple of months later. Nor did regulators act on the Minnesota health officials' September warnings about a baby hospitalized after taking formula from the same plant. In fact, the FDA did a routine inspection of the plant that very month and concluded that its issues weren't major. And they say it was only in January that FDA inspectors actually went to the plant in response to the complaint. And since Abbott shuttered the plant a month later and recalled its products, making the shortages worse, the administration hasn't exactly acted with urgency. It failed to proactively deal with the problem, with the president claiming last week that he and others would have had to be mind readers to have acted earlier on a crisis that was being reported as early as January. Then, even when the problem became unignorable, the administration had to be pressured for days by Democrats and Republicans alike to use the Defense Production Act, which he now has done, to get formula on the shelves, despite falsely claiming to have been the first to suggest the wartime law as a way to deal with the pandemic. And they continue down here saying, but governments around the world and even in the United States are today and have been in the past engaged in production in a vast array of different industries, sometimes competing with the private sector, in other cases as monopoly producers. Even in capitalist societies, there has been a widely held principle that certain things are so critical to the functioning of life and the economy that they shouldn't be left to the whims of unaccountable private actors looking to get rich at any cost, but to be put under some kind of democratic control and their revenues allowed to be recycled for the common good. So again, tying into this idea that any industry that has somewhat inelastic demand, or any industry that is revolving around a basic life necessity, whether that's housing, whether that's healthcare, whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's any number of things, including baby formula, those should not be things that are left up to the whims of profit-driven corporations who are going to skirt a lot of these regulations, who are going to ignore glaring problems in their facilities, all to continue delivering record profits to their shareholders. But they continue here saying an obvious and perennial case is healthcare, where countries that have state-dominated insurance systems, Medicare for all, in other words, of different forms and variances, have far better health outcomes than privatized, corporate-controlled systems in the United States, the richest country in the world. And in those countries where the state also owns and operates the bulk of the health sector itself as a monopoly, those superior health outcomes are delivered at an especially low cost. And the idea that the government should not be providing healthcare simply because this is capitalism, damn it, has long been a talking point in the United States, but in the past it was at least mainly confined to spokespeople for corporations and the right, and one that they've tried to throw at virtually every other initiative meant to protect Americans' economic security that we don't find remotely controversial today. And they finish here saying, but healthcare is just one example. Look at Sweden, where even after decades of neoliberal pressures, the government is still directly involved in producing and managing everything from pharmaceuticals, banking, logistics, to housing, forestry, and telecommunications, even alcohol sales and airports. It's a similar story across the rest of Scandinavia, all wealthy and also capitalist countries that have far higher standards of living and happiness than in the United States. So I think that was a great breakdown, basically summarizing how Pete Buttigieg's position on this is just reinforcing the same exact ideals and the same exact structure of capitalism that created this baby formula shortage in the first place. So at every single level, whether you want to look at this from the perspective of a capitalist country like some of these Nordic countries they were referencing here, at a fundamental level, regardless of if you consider yourself to be a socialist, a communist, or a capitalist, there are just some industries that should not be under the purview of the private sector. And baby formula production very clearly is one of those industries. So, at the very least, it's great, I guess, that even late to the game, the Biden administration has invoked the Defense Production Act. That's great. Probably not going to be enough. We're still going to be dealing with this shortage for potentially weeks or months down the line, in combination with them shipping more formula over from Europe. That's also good. But again, it doesn't address the fundamental issues that are at stake right now. I mean, Abbott, just as an example, is the same corporation that was helping to produce COVID tests in the United States. And once there was a slightly reduced demand for those COVID tests, as cases started to drop in the country, they literally destroyed thousands and thousands of COVID tests in order to maintain a low supply so that they could keep the costs high. And then later, when we had an uptick in COVID cases, what do you know? We have a shortage in COVID tests. So, whatever the industry may be, if it's somewhat inelastic, if it revolves things that are necessary just to maintain people's lives, those are not things that should be up to the purview of the private sector and profit-driven corporations that are very clearly failing us time and time again. So I kind of appreciate Pete Buttigieg for blaming this issue on capitalism, because he's right. And, maybe this is part of the reason why young people in this country are starting to see through the bullshit and are moving more and more so towards left-wing economic principles like socialization of industries like baby formula production or healthcare or any of the other ones that we were just talking about.